Yes and no. The teachers that I interviewed initially, none of them had really detailed lesson plans, and a lot of them had mixed feelings about having detailed lesson plans. And upon observing their lessons, that I think they were missing out on certain key parts of what makes learning effective. For example, objectives were not clear, and therefore what learning was actually happening was a bit of a mystery. At the same time, there was a lot of room for student initiative and for student interests to be explored. So I think that having a balance of objectives, some linked to standards, which are clear about what kind of mental processes a student is going to be able to do at the end of a class that they weren't able to do in the beginning, is really important. At the same time, enough flexibility so that students' own interests and questions can still guide the lesson sequence in a meaningful way that the students can feel connected to. From what I observed, an effective lesson has several components and they all work together. One was that students' existing knowledge had to be accessed, and that could be done through a formative assessment, but teachers had some understanding of what the kids already knew about the topic that they were talking about. Second is that the kids were actively involved in the process. It wasn't, there was recently a quote I read that's quite useful in this way, and that is, good teachers don't teach. And what it means is that the students are the ones putting in the effort and the talking and the thinking, which oftentimes teachers think is their responsibility, but it's not. So active learning is the second component. Third is reflection, that kids throughout the lesson were reflecting on how they were doing and what they needed to do to improve, and that happened during the lesson and after the lesson. Now, involved in all this is that the lessons were also connected to student interests in some way, and the kids were having, as a result of that, they were having some fun, and that has to do with the relationship between the students and the teachers. So three components: prior knowledge, active learning, and reflection, within a context where it's safe, there's good relationships between the teachers and the students, and it's relevant for the students. For what makes assessment effective, there was an image of John Hattie there, and I think he's got some really good advice, along with Grant Wiggins, who also was really well known in the field of formative assessment. And so key to effective assessment is feedback. That's at the core, and ultimately assessment is not an evaluation, but rather it's information that a student needs to know in terms of their progress towards a goal. So that would be one principle of effective feedback. And if a grade is part of that feedback, it's important to know that that's what a kid is going to see, and they often won't look past that. That's not to say grades aren't important, but if a grade or a number is part of the feedback, that's what a student is going to see. So that would be a second important principle. Third is that it needs to be timely. Kids forget what it is that they're working on after a certain amount of time. So I like to have a 48-hour turnaround period, and the different teachers I talked to, all of them were within a week, but the more, I would say, effective teachers had somewhere around a 48-hour window, and they were also giving feedback throughout classes. It wasn't just at the end of a unit. And crucial to the success of all of this is that kids need to know what the target is, so that the feedback they're getting is meaningful. And so effective teachers provide a very specific target, and the feedback they give is information on how far students are towards attaining that target and what sort of strategic adjustments need to be made for that target to be reached.